Hey, everybody, this is Robb Ryerse, Political Director of Vote Common Good. So glad to chat with you today. We are continuing our series of conversations with folks who are running for office, candidates for common good, people who've thrown their hat into the ring, raised their hand, stood up, said, you know what, things are not good out here, and I'm not just going to complain about it on Facebook. I'm going to get involved. I'm going to do something. In fact, I'm going to run for office. And today our guest is running for one of those seats that every 6 years all of us think, man, we got to flip this one, and because it's held by a United States senator who's always, concerned, troubled, bothered, but ends up doing exactly what Donald Trump wants in the end. And maybe I'm talking about the senator from Maine, Susan Collins. And today we are talking with Jordan Wood, who is running for the United States Senate in Maine and looking to unseat Susan Collins. Hey, Jordan, so great to chat with you today.
Hey, Rob, great to be here.
Yeah. Okay, so right out of the gate, every 6 years it feels like, okay, we've got to beat Susan Collins. And every 6 years there's like a deep disappointment about it. How can she how is she beatable? How can you do this? Let's just get right into it. How do you win this race?
Yeah, well, I think one thing to keep in mind is that we have Democrats have not really contested this election to beat Susan Collins every 6 years. Really, 2020 was the first time there was a real concerted effort. So, and I think a lot has changed, both since her previous elections in 2014 and 2008, and in 2020. Since the 2020 election, Roe v. Wade was overturned, January 6th happened. I also think that there's in Maine, which so decisively voted for Joe Biden in 2020, he won the state by 9 points while Susan was reelected. And the, I believe that the voters in Maine really were thinking about the post Trump American
Mm,
politics and a hope that there would be, in a democracy, we need two healthy political parties that believe in democracy, and a hope that there would need to be some Republican leaders in Congress who were willing to help with that rebuilding process. And one thing is going to be certain after this next midterm election, which is unfortunately Donald Trump will still be in the White House. And so voters are thinking about this decision differently. And
mhm.
to your point, I mean, a theme of this campaign has been our country is a moment of crisis, and Maine needs a senator with the courage to stand up for what's right, to stand up for our state, to stand up for Donald Trump, and not just give us words of concern and alarm. And I think voters have really had enough of it and understand fully that Susan Collins is not someone that we can rely on to have the courage to stand up for our democracy and to stand up to this White House when we need her to.
Yeah. It's interesting. I'm running for Congress here in Arkansas,
Right.
and it's kind of similar in the sense that both of our opponents on the surface seem to be the kind of Republicans that maybe are kind of old school or throwback Republicans. They're not they're not the MAGA extremists. They're not Marjorie Taylor Greene or Lauren
Right.
Boebert or Matt Gaetz. And so, we think about, well, what is the kind of Republican Party we would want? I think we would want a Republican Party that's made up of people like Susan Collins and Steve Womack and others like them who seem a bit more level headed, a bit more principled in some way. And yet, the super frustrating thing is you've got the hopes that they'll stand up to Donald Trump, and his administration, and then when push comes to shove, they don't.
Yeah.
They go along with him in the end, and it's, I don't know. Do you have that sense of like, wow, I wish I didn't have to do this because this person is not who I hoped they would be?
I I totally agree with what you're saying, and I am being very truthful when I say it was not in my plan to run for U.S. Senate. And I think if this presidential election had gone differently,
Yeah,
I don't know that I would be running for U.S. Senate.
yeah.
And the and Steve Womack's a great example who I've actually met before. And I don't know if you know this about my background, but I just stepped down from running an organization called Democracy First, of which I did a lot of work with what I would say are principled pro democracy Republicans, many of which are quite conservative,
Mm-hmm.
but are willing, like I am, to set aside our policy differences in this moment of crisis for our democracy to work with people across the aisle who are committed to just the most fundamental nonpartisan principles of our democracy, namely that we need to accept the outcome of elections when all the votes are counted, denounce political violence, not spread misinformation about our elections. Um, and
I feel like you're
and that
asking too
again, these are
much, Jordan.
basic.
You are asking too much.
Yeah, yes, but
Right.
the truth is, people, Republicans like Steve Womack, I disagree with on a lot of policy,
Yeah.
but he is somebody who,
Yeah.
as I understand him, does agree with the core principles of our democracy
Yeah.
and is willing to abide by them. And I think has gotten primaried from the right in
Mm-hmm.
the past. Is that right?
Yeah.
Just because
Yeah.
he would not promote Donald Trump's lies about the election.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So tell us about you. I mean, we've talked about Susan Collins enough. Let's talk about Jordan Wood. Tell us about you and your background and how you come to make the decision to run for the United States Senate.
So I was born in Lewiston, which is in central Maine, working class town. My father's a pastor. My mom's a teacher. When I was born, my mom had to stop working to provide childcare for my twin brother and I. She had to go back to work when I was a child because the church my dad served couldn't afford to provide the family with health insurance due to skyrocketing costs. I started work at 16 in construction, worked through high school, college. I went to Calvin College, a Christian
Okay.
college in Grand Rapids. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. I did some classes at Calvin Seminary. Yeah.
oh, get out.
Yeah.
And, I mean, you'll appreciate this. I mean, I was only able to go to college because I was eligible for need-based student loans
Yeah.
and still graduated with nearly $100,000 in student loan debt. I also got a slight discount from Calvin because my father's a pastor.
Yeah.
And it was one reason that I went there. And I was also in second grade when Susan Collins was first elected our senator here in Maine.
Mm.
And I say that not just to point out the need for new generational leadership, but that these issues around affordability, that my middle class family, who most of my childhood really lived near paycheck to paycheck, that we were able to overcome to achieve the future that we want. Those affordability problems have not just continued in the 30 years that Susan Collins has been our senator, but they have become insurmountable. And I think are putting out of reach for so many Americans the idea that I was raised with, that if you worked hard, you followed the rules, you told the truth, and you treated people well, you could achieve the future that you want in this country. I think that is becoming out of reach for so many Americans. And I think that at its core, this is what has put our democracy in such jeopardy and at risk, is that people don't believe democracy is able to deliver for them and is able to preserve this idea of the American dream. And I think that's what we're fighting for here is I think about this campaign really as two issues. It is about the need to preserve the future of our country and our democracy and fix the broken political system by ending political corruption and reforming our democracy, which has really been my life's professional work. And then the issue of affordability. And I focus that on childcare. We need a system of universal affordable, accessible childcare. I say right now, America doesn't just have a broken childcare system; we just don't have a system at all. Um, we need universal health care. Obamacare was a step in the right direction, but it was not fixing entirely this broken system. We need a Medicare for all program that makes healthcare something that is available to everyone in this country in an affordable way. And then housing. We are in a housing crisis. I mean, I
Hmm.
see it in Maine, in every county I visit, but it is in every state. I have my twin brother
Hmm.
lives in Seattle. It's a crisis there. I've lived in Washington, D.C. It's a crisis there. And it is something that is going to require the federal government to both pass new reforming and zoning reforms, but also a massive investment in creating housing, building
Mm.
housing that is going to meet the demand,
Yeah.
and make sure that working people have a place to live and that they can live in the communities that they work and are
Yes.
from.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I want to talk about housing for a minute because I think it's an absolutely critical issue. Here in my district in Arkansas, housing prices have gone up 70% since in the last 5 years since 2019, and rent has gone up 50%. And I can assure you this: wages have not gone up 70 or 50%. It is. And then on top of that, we're not even talking about the price of groceries and everything else, but just affordable housing is such a crisis that it feels like it doesn't get nearly enough attention in the national conversation about the economy. But it is one of the biggest things affecting people all over the country. Young people can't buy homes. People, as you mentioned, people can't live in the communities where they work, and it is absolutely terrifying to think of what kind of economic impact this is going to have. And at the same time, it also feels like, well, this is a local issue. Every communities are handling this. Communities are trying to figure this out. But I agree with you that it feels like a national crisis to me that requires the federal government to step in. And what does that kind of investment look like? What can the federal government do to address the housing crisis that is really all over the country?
Yeah, and I think it is a local issue, but I think about that as it's a crisis that looks different on a county
Mm-hmm.
level in Maine and then on a
Mm-hmm.
state level. And I'll just, as one example, my twin brother lives in Seattle. The amount of money that they pay, they just bought their first home,
Mm-hmm.
is is a wild number for many of us in Maine to think about buying a home.
Yeah.
But they also, in Seattle, they deal with a real crisis around foreign investment buying up
Mm.
residential property. That has not, foreign investors buying up residential property has not really been a problem in Maine. But what has been is the lack of a housing stock, a lot of older homes. Um, so in Maine, we need to build 80,000 housing
Mm.
units to in the next 10 years to meet demand.
Mm.
We're nowhere near on track for that. Um, and the other thing is the change in the housing price. I mean, I was up in Aroostook County, which is in the northern part of the state, last week, and I was talking to a woman who bought a home there 8 years ago for $80,000, which in a lot of places in America, like a home for $80,000, that's great. That home now, though, on the market would be $250,000.
Yeah.
So that also seems, for if you're living in New York City, wow, that's such an affordable price for us. But think about it for people in that community
Yep.
who are used to a housing market that's gone
Yep.
from 80 to 250, and
Yep.
what that means for working class families. So I think that the other problem we have in Maine, which is maybe not something that in Arkansas you deal with, but there's a tourism is a huge
Mm.
industry in our state.
Yep.
We're vacation land, and so where I live in Mid Coast, Maine now, so much of the residential property is being bought up for summer rentals
Mm-hmm.
and Airbnb and other rentals. So you can't find long-term rentals.
Yep.
Not that it's too expensive,
Yep.
but that it's priced at a nightly rate rather than a year-long lease.
Mm-hmm.
And again, so like these problems, I think they look different, but they all speak to the same thing, which is affordability and access. And
Yeah.
so I really think about three things that the federal government can do to address this that that really tackles the problem in different ways. The first is permitting and zoning reform, and I think
Mm-hmm.
that it's another issue. Like this is crazy to say, but in the town I live, there's almost no residential zoning laws.
Mm.
So we don't deal with it takes 6 months to get a permit. Oh, and then there's this requirement that every house have two parking spots or something. We don't have that issue, but some towns in Maine do. So there's a need to evaluate what zoning and permitting reform can be changed. And Elizabeth Warren has worked with Republican Tim Scott on a new piece of legislation that would address this. So I think there's some bipartisan support for it. The other is tenants' rights, which right now
Mm-hmm.
renters have very the only as a renter the only power you have over your landlord is leaving.
Mm-hmm.
But if you don't have anywhere to leave to, then you actually have no power in that dynamic. And so creating tenants' rights that gives renters
Yep.
power. And then the other is, and I think this is the most important because in Maine it is the one that is talked about the most, is we need more housing stock. We have
Mm-hmm.
created housing scarcity, and we need to build more housing um, so that there is more availability and competition in the market. And
Yeah.
that's again, there's some places in America where the the housing stock in a is not the problem, but that
Yep.
is a problem we have here.
Yep.
And so those are the three things. And the third one is the state doesn't have enough money to meet that demand of 80,000 new housing units. It
Mm-hmm.
will require an investment from the federal government to do it.
Yeah. Yep. Yep. Absolutely. Yeah, that's good stuff. So what else are folks in Maine? You talked a bit about the crisis of democracy. You talked about some specific issues like healthcare. We've talked about affordable housing. What's the what's the mood of voters in Maine? Like, how are they feeling right now? Because
Yeah.
one of the things that we need to remember is that voters rarely vote on policy issues. Like they're not policy wonks that are like, reading draft legislation and that people vote based on how they feel. And so I'm
Yeah.
curious, like, what your sense is of the mood, the feeling, the vibe of voters in Maine right now.
Yeah. And this is why I say there's two issues about this campaign, and the second one is affordability, because I think I really look at it as a comprehensive problem.
Yeah.
And when we think about the economy, what does that mean to voters? How do they feel? Is that they feel like it's too expensive to live,
Yeah.
and that they can't provide for their family. They can't, in some cases, have a family because they can't afford it. They can't plan for their child to go to college. They can't, again, with this idea that I was raised with, that so many Americans were, that you could achieve the future you want in this country. It all comes down to affordability. And I think there are some people who housing is actually not a problem, but the problem is that they have medical debt, or
Hmm.
they're afraid of losing their job, or they've lost their job and they don't have health insurance. And this Republican bill that Susan Collins helped pass by bringing it to the floor to a vote, I mean, tens of thousands of Mainers are going to lose in Maine. We call it Maine Care here in Medicaid.
Hmm.
That's the affordability crisis for them. For people with young children, childcare is the affordability crisis for them.
Yeah.
So I think of it, and that all comes back to how do you feel about how things are going, and that's why I think we've got to tackle it at once in a comprehensive way. Um, but Maine is we have the oldest population in the country, and
Hmm.
the increase in population since 2020 is close to 80% college educated, and we have one of the whitest populations in the country, 95% white. So that is the one demographic that has shifted more towards Democrats since 2020 than any other. Older, white, educated voters, a
Hmm.
higher income. And that's notable to me because when I talk about affordability, I'm talking about policies that are expanding the role of government to do good. And oftentimes, like when I graduated college, you probably remember this, older, white, higher income, educated voter, that was traditional Republican voters,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But they're shifting towards us, and they're shifting because of a response to Donald Trump and what this Republican Party has become,
Hmm.
which is one that is alienating for older Americans, particularly when they think about the country they grew up in and concepts of patriotism, hard work, sacrifice, telling the truth, and in this fear about democracy. I mean, I was speaking at a rally yesterday in Lewiston, Auburn. Um, there's 300 people there on the bridge demonstrating, and it was about Donald Trump's lawlessness,
Hmm.
um, the the what how they're responding to the deployment of the National Guard in Washington D.C., the expansion of ICE, and what that means, not just for immigrant and marginalized communities, which I
Yep.
think is a top priority, but what it means for all of our rights. And
Yep.
what does it mean to have a paramilitary force, really, that that the president has expanded while cutting social services into the largest military force. I mean, it's larger than, as I understand, the new budget is a larger budget than every other country's military except for the US and China.
Yeah.
And the alarm that that causes, but also just the embrace of political violence. I mean, one of the decisions that or factors I'd say that prompted me to think very seriously about what role my family and I could take in this moment for our democracy and to run is Donald Trump's pardoning of the January 6th insurrectionists
Yeah.
day one in office. And I was actually at the Capitol on January 6th as a chief of staff for Katie Porter and barricaded in that office. And I saw what these people did,
Yep.
the threat that this movement poses to the future of our country and our democracy. And Donald Trump's pardoning of them creates a permission structure for political violence.
Yeah.
And it overturns this idea in America that in a democracy we settle our differences at the ballot box, not through violence.
Yeah.
And that all of that wrapped up together is what I think is the feeling, particularly with older Americans, and
Hmm.
what's going on in Ukraine. This idea of the U.S. abandoning NATO in these alliances and our standing in the world that we've
Yep.
had in their entire lifetimes. The elimination of USAID, I think all of this feeds together into like this is not the
Yeah.
country that I grew up in, that I lived most of my lives in, that I raised my family in, that I want my grandkids to live in the future. And that fear, that anxiety, that all is driving so much of what is was motivating voters right now.
Yeah. Yeah. Jordan, you mentioned earlier that your dad was a pastor and your mom was a teacher. Um, how does a I, I don't know your church background at all. How does a pastor's kid grow up to be a Democratic candidate for the United States Senate? I mean, it's the numbers are, the odds are that you would be, if you grew up in a pastor's home, you'd be running against Susan Collins, as the MAGA candidate, trying to primary her as opposed to
Yeah,
running as a Democrat. How do you
yeah.
yeah, how do you, what was it like growing up as a PK, as a pastor's kid, and how do you end up as a Democrat I've grown up as a pastor's kid?
Well, love that question. I mean, my family has been Democratic all my life.
Mm.
And I remember from a young age asking my mother why that was. And she, because also both my grandfathers are ordained
Mm-hmm.
pastors. And my mom said, well, abortion is one of the most important issues. I said, well, but mom, you know, other Christian families, if they say abortion, it's they have a different view of it than we do. They're not pro-choice, and that's a hard thing for a kid to understand. But she explained it to me, and she said, "Well, your grandfather, who's a doctor, he was a doctor. He did his residency in rural Kentucky before Roe v. Wade,
Mm.
and in Kentucky, abortion was illegal. And your grandfather watched women die in the hospital who had backdoor abortions." And
Mm.
he raised us with the understanding that we should never live in a country that outlaws abortion because it kills women.
Mm.
And my grandfather, amazing, 96, still with us. He was a medical missionary. He took his family in 1960 to the Congo, where
Wow.
my mom primarily grew up, running a hospital in Kempese. Helped start one of the first blood banks in the Congo. And social justice, this calling to serve and make the world a better place, was fundamentally the motivation that my family has always brought to our faith and how we understand what our role in the world is and what our calling is. So the other side of my family, my father's an immigrant. His father, my grandfather, moved. They immigrated here from Australia, came on his ship, took him about a month, and he came over as a missionary as well, part of the Billy Graham movement. He was called from Australia to the United States to help join
Huh.
that ministry.
Huh.
Yeah, I still have
We
yet to meet
normally,
anyone else in America whose immigration story is becoming a missionary in the United
yes,
States.
yes. We normally think of we send missionaries from here around the world, not that we're
Yeah,
not the mission field. Yeah, that's
yeah,
that's fascinating. Hey, let
and
me. Yeah,
yeah,
oh,
but
I'm
I
sorry. Go
say,
ahead.
and I've just got to say that this idea of social justice in our faith, being something that calls us to do good in a material way as well, expanding healthcare, opposing the Iraq War. I remember demonstrating as a child at that. So all of that. I mean, that's just the household I grew up in,
Yeah,
and it wasn't partisan. It was
yeah,
more values based, and that those
yeah,
values aligned with the Democratic Party.
yeah. Wow, that's super interesting. Um, so very different from my own story, but that's really great. I love it.
And
Um,
you're a pastor, correct?
yeah, yeah.
You,
I'm
what
third.
denomination?
Um, I grew up in a Baptist denomination up north, where we weren't allowed to have anything to do with Southern Baptists because they were too liberal. Just to kind of put it on the spectrum for you, of like it was super conservative, super fundamentalist. Went through,
Wow.
and third generation pastor in that denomination. My grandfather helped to found the denomination. Was
What's the name of the denomination?
It's called the General Association of Regular Baptists. They really need they need a marketing person, back,
Yeah, my father's American Baptist,
yeah.
and so
So yeah,
yeah, very different.
this was the Northern Baptist Convention. There used to be a Northern Baptist Convention, Southern Baptist Convention. Northern Baptist Convention eventually became the American Baptist. This is a splinter group off of them. When they went liberal, this was the kind of fundamentalist reaction to that. So
Wow,
yeah. So
wow, wow.
and I've gone on quite a journey since then.
So we are of the same denomination basically, but because we were Northern Baptist, but
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
you splintered away.
Yes. Yep. Yep. And yeah, and now the church that my wife and I lead is we like to say it's post denominational. We're trying to get beyond all that stuff. Uh, Let me ask you about Maine. Oh, oh, Maine is one of the most incredible states in the country, but it's so far it's so far away from everything. Give us the reason. tell us what do people not know about Maine that they should know?
I mean, you are right. It is an amazing place. I love my state, and I think I will be honest. One of the final things that I had to come to terms with that I believe we will be successful in this campaign because we must for what's at stake for our country. But that also means I won't get to be in Maine all the time. I'll
Yeah.
have to spend time in Washington. Maine has just a beautiful natural beauty,
Mm.
and we have 4,000 miles of coastline. We actually have the longest coastline on the east coast of the continental United States. Alaska has a longer coastline, but it all it is such a it is such a peaceful place,
Mm.
and we have mountains. We have, I mean, you could spend a life just exploring our state's natural beauty. But I love our history and our heritage, and I mentioned the theme of this campaign is this idea of Maine needs courage, not concern.
Mm.
And courage, I think, is truly ingrained in what our state's ethos is. Our motto is Dirigo, which is I lead,
Mm.
and our state has led in so many ways. We Joshua Chamberlain, who won the Battle of Gettysburg, was our governor. He was a great. I mean, he was a professor, but also comes from a religious background, part of the abolition movement. Harriet Beecher Stowe, who wrote Uncle Tom's Cabin, she wrote that in Maine. Um, we Frances Perkins, who we just celebrated the anniversary of Social Security. I mean, she is largely responsible for that. She was the one of the, if not the first female cabinet secretary. She was
Mm.
the Secretary of Labor for 3 terms, all of FDR's term, but she helped create the minimum wage, Social Security. Um, a true courageous woman that has just an amazing history. But I think beyond Margaret Chase Smith, who this seat that I'm running for is actually the one that Margaret Chase Smith held. She stood up with courage and spoke out against her own party during the Red Scare, the Joe McCarthy era,
Mm.
to call out Republicans for the way that their lies were undermining our democracy and creating partisan when we needed to be united. And man, that's courage. I think our governor, Janet Mills, in the White House earlier
Mm.
this year, when so many leaders across our country were giving in and bowing down to Donald Trump, and sort of saying it's not our place to defend the marginalized. And in this case, it was trans kids. And our governor just stood up in the White House and said, "You're not you're not going to bully us. You don't get to decide the law in our state. I'll see you in court." And she won. I said, that's
Mm.
courage. It
Yeah.
takes, and Donald Trump enacted a campaign of retribution against our state in
Mm-hmm.
response to that. But we are a small state, but a state that has a rich, proud tradition of standing up for ourselves with courage to bullies.
Yeah.
And I'm very proud of that tradition, and hope in the U.S. Senate to continue it on. But that's all to say also, like, we know that's not the leadership we're seeing from Susan Collins. We know what courage looks like and what we expect, and we know we are not seeing that. And I say the best thing that Susan Collins could do for her reelection is be courageous. It's just
Yeah.
stand up
Yeah.
for our state, and I think she'd be rewarded for that. But we know she's not going to do that
Mm-hmm.
because she hasn't done it the 30 years that she's been there.
Yep. Yep. She's had opportunity after opportunity after opportunity, and she just hasn't done it. Jordan, we ask voters to use the common good as their voting criteria, is the reason why they vote. We ask people that are running for office to make a commitment that they'll use the common good as their governing criteria. And for us at Vote Common Good, it's not a policy prescription. It's a shared set of values. And I'm curious, when you hear the phrase common good and you think about being the United States Senator from Maine, how how do you think about how the common good would play in how you would serve the people of Maine in the US Senate?
Oh, love that question. So when I'm asked, what what type of senator are you going to be? I said, it's pretty simple to me. I'll wake up every day and, to the best of my ability, serve and represent the people of Maine the best I can. And to me, that is the common good.
Mhm.
And that my role as a senator and Congress at its best is in pursuit of the common good. Government at its best is providing the common good. And the government, I believe, is very uniquely positioned to provide the common good. And,
Mhm.
we've talked about issues around affordability. All of that is about the common good. It is not, I say, billionaires and corporations, special interests, they have a lot of advocates in Congress
Mhm.
and in Washington. And but what the people need to achieve the common good is advocates for them, and that's
Yeah.
my only job. And I
Yeah.
think I believe that truly, but that's entirely connected to democracy. Is how do we achieve the common good?
Mhm.
And it's through democracy, and that's why we must preserve democracy. That's why we must reform it to both restore trust and make possible these changes that we need. And I find the concept of hope in democracy so intrinsically intertwined, because it is this idea of achieving a future that is better in this country, that is more just, that pursues the common good.
Mhm.
And we've got to believe that that's possible and have hope for it.
Yeah.
And how do we make it how do we realize it is through democracy.
Yeah. Jordan, people that want to find you, support you, be a part of this campaign, um, there's people all over the country that there are, there's Senate race. Maybe their Senate race is not competitive, or they don't have one this cycle, and they say, you know what, I want to adopt a competitive Senate race to be my own, and I'm gonna adopt the race in Maine and support Jordan against Susan Collins. How can people find you? How can they be a part of this campaign and support you in that?
Well, I hope as many listeners as possible do adopt the state of Maine in this race, because it is the path to creating a pro democracy Democratic majority in the Senate. Electjordan.com, Jordanwood Maine, Jordanwood ME on other socials. We're running a grassroots funding campaign. We don't take money from corporate PACs or lobbyists. I'm proud to say we've had over 100,000 contributions so far.
Mm.
It is a grassroots funded effort. So any help folks can provide, sign up to volunteer too. They're especially folks in Maine will have lots of opportunities, and I believe that's how we're going to win in November.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So say the website one more time. Elect Jordan.
Electjordan.com.
Excellent. Okay. Hopefully, folks will head there and check that out. Jordan, thank you for taking some time to chat with us today. Let's stay in touch and go get them. We gotta win this thing.
Thanks, Rob. You too. Good luck on your race, and hope to talk soon.
All right. Thank you. Thanks everybody. We'll talk soon.